All right, if you will take a copy of God's Word and turn to the book of John. Book of John is the fourth gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. We'll start in chapter 1, verse 1. I do want to share with you that whenever I went on my prayer retreat back in October, how I typically begin stuff like that is I'm going to come up with all these really cool ideas, lay them before the Lord, and then let Him tell me what we're actually going to do. And so my cool idea was Revelation, not the book of John. Another cool idea I had was like the book of Judges, some other really fun books. And as the more I prayed, it became very, very clear that we will be in the book of John for the year. So perhaps maybe changing on Easter and some special occasions, but I wanted to do some different things, and the more I prayed, it was more just stick with it. And so we should be hitting John chapter 17 about Thanksgiving time, and to just kind of work our way through the best we can. And so with that, one of the things that I'm going to challenge you with, okay, you probably have read the book of John before, but the more I have read it and studied just the first 18 verses, and that's what we're going to go through today, if you have read it at all, and you have, as I said, you believe that you know everything about it, well, to get ready, because you don't. This is a book about Jesus, and it is written as a story about Jesus. And whenever John was writing this, he has really one main focus, and you can read that in John chapter 20, verse 30 and 31, that he writes it, and he says, so that you may believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And so everything he's writing from verse 1 to the end of John, it is so that we might believe that Jesus was truly and is truly the Son of God, and nothing distracts him from writing about Jesus being the Son of God. He desires for me and you to not only believe, but as Philippians has talked about, that we might know him and then know him some more. And you can expect that as we go through John, so that we are going to know him a little bit better week by week, and he's going to get much bigger to us than we have ever expected him to be. This passage in and of itself has one that's just gripped my heart this week, and I hope that it's going to grip yours in the way that it has mine. But in verses 1 through 18, I do want to be able to just lay this out here for you, that you're going to probably hear it called the prologue, okay? And so what is a prologue? Well, if you think about how any speaker starts, how any movie starts, how any book starts, that it's going to have an introductory scene, it's going to have a preface, it's going to introduce what they're actually going to be talking about through that movie, through that speech, or through that book, and it's probably going to give you a general roadmap of where they are going, though the details, you're going to pick it up as you go. And so if you came up with a movie scene in your mind that it grabbed your attention and held it to the very end, well, that was a good introductory scene of whatever movie you might have thought of. I thought of Saving Private Ryan. With that introductory scene, it is the day, D-Day, which was June 6th, which is, by the way, has how I remember my wedding anniversary. It was on D-Day, and I told Sarah that week, it was like, well, that was my D-Day. So for the week, but that's how I remember it. And even with that, was that opening scene, if you've watched anything or have studied the D-Day, you know that it is almost absolute chaos as they are trying to storm the beaches of Normandy and whatever else. And in that introductory scene of Saving Private Ryan, it is chaos. The guys are trying to go ahead and finish the storm, but then it introduces you, or at least shows you, the horrors of war throughout the rest of that movie and kind of prepares you to be able to receive that. Now, just like you and I would not read or watch a movie without seeing the introductory scenes, we should not read the book of John without reading the prologue first, okay? Because it helps you interpret it, it helps you understand it, and it helps you understand the flow of the story much better. Now, I will not say that you might enjoy the second half of a movie, but if you had watched the first half and watched the beginning of it, it just made more sense, okay? And so just as whenever we come to read Scripture, you might get something by beginning after the prologue. I'm not saying God's not going to use it. I'm saying that it's going to make much more sense of why God wrote this down for us to understand whenever we read the prologue and then read the rest of it after that. And so that's what John's doing, and we're going to be able to see what he's trying to build off of as we read through this prologue. But really, what we should be taking away from this today is not only is Jesus this larger than life and larger than you thought of him as, but we are going to see what John's going to be talking about throughout the whole book. Okay, and I'll try to point those out as we go. And so we're just going to pick up in verse 1, if you guys will turn your eyes there for real quick. But verse 1, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." If you're taking notes, really, the first point is that it is just the Word. Okay, this is written so that your attention will focus on the Word over and over again. Okay, and so in verse 1, in the beginning was the Word. And so whenever I say the Word, I am talking about that capitalized word inside of your Bible right there. The Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That is meant to be repetitive. It is meant to grab your attention, but it is also meant that the first three words used in the book of John are also the first three words used in the Bible altogether, in the beginning. Okay, and so why does John have to put it down like that, and why is he the only gospel writer that wrote it like that? Well, he was having some trouble. Me and you live in unique times, but at the same time, we're not really living in that unique of times, because even in this day, people were having trouble really believing that Jesus was truly the Son of God, and they would be able to make him out to be a lot of different things. If they were pagan, then they were just kind of thinking of him as some other god with a little g that they could add to their life. Or even if they were religious and they were Jewish and they were seeing these things, whenever the Word came into the world, they did not recognize him as what he truly was. And so there was all of these Jesuses going around, and John is trying to funnel it all down to what Jesus truly was. And for him to be able to do that, he thought, what if we went back to the beginning? To be able to be sure that we're seeing him for what he really, actually, truly is and was. And so that's what he does. That the book of Genesis should be coming into your mind whenever John is writing this. In the beginning was the Word, and he is talking about Jesus being there in the beginning. In other words, Jesus has no beginning. We go back to as far as we can think in the beginning, whenever God created everything, but even before the beginning, Jesus was. Do you see that he's trying to make sure that you know that Jesus wasn't just a man, but he's an eternal being, and he has an identity. But he continues to move forward with that idea that the Word was not only in the beginning, but that the Word was with God. And he's making a distinction between him and God the Father on purpose. People are trying to make Jesus into somebody that had a beginning, and it was also they were trying to make Jesus into somebody who was created by God, and that he was in the form of God in some way, shape, or form. But whenever he continues to move forward, and the Word was with God, he is making a distinction that Jesus and this eternal being has a relational side to him, that he can actually be with somebody. And so whenever you're thinking about who you came to church with this morning, you guys may be of one family, but you were with that person as you walked in the door. And so Jesus, in the beginning and in creation, was with his Father before they created the world. He continues, and the Word was God. Okay, just because he's a distinctive person does not make him any less of a God than what God the Father is himself. He is trying to point out the true identity of Jesus. That, yeah, he was in man form. The Word, though, was an eternal being. Okay? And you think about what the creation was like whenever God actually began to create. As Colossians says that everything was made through him, or even as this section of verses says, I should say. Verse 2, he was in the beginning with God. Verse 3, all things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Okay? Thinking about the massive depth of those words for a second. Through this man, Jesus Christ, all things were made. How did he create everything? He spoke. There was words flowing from the mouth of God, of which I believe was probably the very substance of Christ himself. The Word is the substance of all creation. And then in Colossians chapter 1, verse 17, it says, not only did he create everything, but all things are held together through him and by him. And so you're thinking that not only is Jesus the substance of all things, but he's also the one holding all things together, to the smallest of atoms, to holding all the sky, the stars in the sky. This is a huge thing to be able to make this claim that Jesus is this massive. Okay? It should be something that is intimidating. It should be something that kind of brings you back and think, I can't even wrap my mind around it. That's because you are a created being and you are talking to your Creator, is where John is driving at. The origin, well, he has none. He is the Creator. We began, but he is the reason why we began. And so, trying to funnel this down of who Jesus really is, well, that's where John's going with this. In verse 4 now, because you're created, because you and I have been created, because all of mankind has been created, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. This is something that whenever we're learning how to not be so selfish in life, we start realizing that the world just does not revolve around us and our little worlds, does it? But as we read the Scriptures, we are seeing that the world does revolve around something, and it does revolve around God. And it's like from him all good things flow. So that the world is just centralized around God, and everything is declaring the glory of the Lord, whether you recognize it or not. The light is shining, and it is bringing life into the world, and that is to be our life. And if you think about what you think about the most, okay, is it really this God whom you were created by, or are we really distracted by so many other things? Yesterday I was very idle. I confessed to Sarah, it's like, Sarah, I'm sitting around, I can tell that I need something to do because I'm thinking and scheming about all of these different ways to try to make more money. And it's like, how much money do I need and how much time do I think I have? I was like, evidently I just have time right now and I'm going to come up with all these great ideas, whatever else. That was where my mind was at. But guys, our lives, we were created for this very one who created us in the first place. He is our life. And the thing that has got us in trouble is that in verse 5, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it, is that the darkness is trying to overcome the true light that is shining into the world, and we have tried to recreate ourselves into so many different things, and that's precisely what we need to be saved from. The Word, that phrase, the Word, it's just absolutely 9 months pregnant. So with meaning. It is a full term. Is like we cannot unpack everything of what this means, but John does try to progress the thoughts. We're actually going to skip verses 6 through 8 and talk about them next week. And we're going to talk about verses 9 through 13 now. And so the Word, He is the Creator. Main point there. He is the Creator. He was in the beginning. He was with God. He was God. And now He is talking about the Creator being the true light that is shining into the world. Verse 9. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through Him, yet the world did not know Him. This almost sounds repetitive, but John's trying to build the idea. Okay, it might mean this, and it's all kind of encompassed into one thing, but John is trying to take us step by step and build the idea into something that was bigger than maybe what you thought of whenever you first walked into the church this morning. But he's talking about this true light. Now, the true light, it means genuine light. It's not just some light. It is the true light. And the true light is now shining into the world. But the problem is that the world did not recognize it. Okay? Again, this should be able to take you back to Genesis chapter 1 language. It's like, because what does it say? Is that in the beginning that there was God, and that the earth was without form, and it was void, and the darkness was over all of the face of the earth, and while the Spirit is hovering over the waters. What is this saying here? Is that the true light is now shining into the world, and yet the world did not know Him. Okay, whenever you and I make our lives about anything but God, it is asking for us to live in darkness and without form and without void and without substance. What were you created for? You were created for God, and you were held together by God, and so therefore we must live our lives for God. And to misunderstand that little sentence, or the very fact that we were made by God and that there is a Creator before us, is to misunderstand God altogether, which then, guess what? Then you misunderstand yourself. Then you misunderstand the world you live in, and then you misunderstand everybody that lives in the world with you. There is this chain reaction that our beginnings must be seen as coming from God, and then we understand everything else as it flows from our Creator. Yes, we live in darkness unless we recognize God for whom He really is. And so John, again, he's funneling these things down, but in verse 11, He came to His own, and His own people did not receive Him. Okay, did not know Him, did not receive Him. I was just thinking about it while I was preparing this. I was wondering how many genders we have now, okay? And so in 2024, I read this as an article, but it said there's 72 extra genders besides male and female. So we're up to 74 now. You're reading through the list, and it's fairly comical, but I'm only going to share a couple of them with you. There's bigender, okay, that you can be two genders at one time, anytime you feel like it, or you could just be one whenever you feel like it. And then there's this other one that was called antigender. You can be as many as you want. It just go with the flow, whatever you feel like today, and that is now your gender, okay? And so just think about that logic. It does not fit the logic of Genesis chapter 2, and then God created them male and female, and everything else from Scripture has flown from that very idea. But we tend to kind of do that with how we think Christianity works too. There's a lot of different ways for us to be able to follow Jesus, and we make all of these different categories for different people to be able to follow Jesus, and however that looks. Again, and what we should recognize is that, yes, we are all different people, starting from different places, and are going to struggle with different sins. We are finite people, and we won't understand everything. I do understand that, but John's trying to make sure you begin rightly, okay? He is trying to be sure that you begin where everybody must begin, and that is the Word has come into the world. The Creator has stepped into this, and you must believe in Him to be saved. Okay? And so he's funneling that very idea down, but John doesn't come up with 72. He only comes up with 2 here in his distinction. And that is, you either believe or you refuse to believe. Now, this is where the book of John's going. What he's going to talk about and he's going to unwrap as we go throughout this story is that there's about 1 million different ways for you to refuse to believe. And you're going to see that one story after the next in John as those details come out. We are also going to see that there are stories of what in verse 12 says, but to all who did receive Him, who believed Him in His name, and He gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, or of the will of man, nor of the flesh, or of the will of man, but they were actually born of God. Okay? You stop there for just a second. To be born of God is to be able to believe in the Word. And not only to believe in the Word, but to believe in the Word as the Creator, the one who has came into a world that has rebelled against Him. And He says, I understand where my creation has gone. I also understand how to fix it. But you cannot fix yourself. You cannot begin where you think you ought to begin. You will begin with me, and Jesus time after time brings people to be able to follow Him by asking them to follow Him first and foremost, and that they surrender their life to doing whatever it is that He's going to call them to do from that point on. That's the gospel, that the Creator is now here, and He is going to fix us, but He's not going to fix you in the way that you desire to be fixed. He's going to fix you in the way that you must be fixed. And so therefore, as we see this is the truth in our day too. I told you, we don't live in unique times. There are a million different ways to refuse to believe. But there is one Savior in whom we must put our faith and truly believe. And time after time, we even get to see that in our day too, don't we? And so this is where John's bringing us. He's going to funnel us all down into this, but now look at verse 14. So again, he's trying to continuously expand the idea. Okay, he started that He's the Creator. He said that the true light is going to come into the world, but people will not recognize Him. They won't be able to see Him, but there will be some of whom that do recognize Him for whom He is, and they will be born of God. But then in verse 14, he begins with all of this Old Testament pictures. And he's trying to show you that not only is this the God from the beginning, but that He's been faithful throughout the generations as well. And how could He actually do that? Because He is the true Son of God. Again, what was John's main purpose for writing? So that you believe that Jesus is the true Son of God. And so this is where he's trying to say this is going to be our ending point here. But in verse 14, and the Word became flesh, and He dwelt among us. And we have seen His glory as the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. Skip to verse 16. For from Him, His fullness we have all received, grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made Him known. So like I said, he's trying to expand the idea. Okay, I was thinking about how to describe just that phrase, the Word, because he brought it back up again. And he's trying to tell you there's more to it. And it's almost like me, instead of whenever I was thinking about it, it's like what you think a sponge, it's like how much water can a sponge actually hold? Well, you know that it can only hold it until it begins to drip out or begins to pour out. And that phrase, the Word, is just something dripping with meaning that we can't actually hold everything of what it actually means. But the thing that he adds to it here is that not only did He come into the world, but He didn't come as some cosmic light. Okay, it says that He became flesh and dwelt among us. Okay, and it said in the literal way of saying that He did become flesh, and then He pitched His tent among us. Okay, that is also taking you back and making us think of the Old Testament pictures. And so you think about Moses. He said that earlier. And that the glory of God is coming from, as of the glory as of the only Son, the Father, full of grace and truth. Can you think of a story where Moses asked to see the Father's glory or God's glory? Okay, if you're taking notes, Exodus chapter 33 through 34. Moses literally asked, I just tried to give it away. Okay, he literally asked, "Show me your glory." And God says, you can't actually see my glory. What is He asking to see? He is asking to see God face to face. And then God makes a way for him to be able to know what His glory is. And He says, I'm going to pass before you and I'm going to declare to you who I am by revealing my very identity while I do so. But you're going to be hid inside of the rock, and I'm then going to put my hand over you to protect you from myself, and then I will pass by. And so whenever He does that, he lays His hand over Moses, and it says that He comes down, and it's like in a pillar of, or like clouds over Moses, puts His hand over Moses, and then begins to pass by him, declaring His faithfulness, His steadfast love to people. He's declaring the goodness and the graciousness of Himself. And while He does that, what does Moses do? All he can do. He bows his head and just begins to worship. You think about that for just a second. This massive thing, the Word of what we're talking about. To recognize Him is to worship. That's the only thing that we can do in response. But to reject Him, It is to completely reject the Creator and the massiveness of whom this being truly is. It is to reject the steadfast love of God throughout generations. It is to reject all things good. It is to reject life itself and to live a life of darkness and just void of a purpose altogether. That is where John is trying to bring us to understand. This is a much bigger deal than just saying that we believe, but seeing that our very purpose, our very life, everything about us must begin with the Word who came and dwelt among us. How did he do that? He said that he became flesh, came in as a baby. He's saying that God himself has disclosed himself to us in such a way that we can now be very personable with him. The other Old Testament thing that you see through Moses, right after he passes by him and his glory comes through, he gives them the law, which then they're able to be able to have the tabernacle to which God dwells amongst his people in a way he never has done before. But in this story, God becomes flesh and dwells among his people in a way he never has before. In a much more personal way. In a way, you and I get to see God in a much clearer way. We get to know how to follow him in a much easier way. We get to be able to be as full of him as we desire to be at this point. It is a much better thing, but the Old Testament pictures are bringing us to be able to see that whenever John saw the glory of the only Son, he saw the same glory that Moses saw, but he saw it in a way that was easier to grasp. That this is the very same God from generations past, and he's full of grace and truth now. That steadfast love that has gone through all generations is now here. Again, much bigger than what we typically give it credit for. But not only do you and I get to see this, even still today, but in verse 16, for from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. You guys remember that sponge I just talked about? You and I, it's like, you're not a sponge, okay? But you, like a sponge, we can be just as full as God as we can. It's like, and you say, well, I'm dry. Okay. Grace upon grace. Grace heaped up on top of grace. He has poured out his fullness for you and I to be able to believe. That means you and I are only as close to Jesus Christ as we want to be. How do we get close to him? John wrote this book so you can be close to him. The scripture was given to us so that me and you can be as close to him as we possibly can. He has allowed us to be able to come to him in prayer and call upon his name and to be able to receive his Spirit, knowing that we're walking in him. It is grace upon grace, and he is heaping more grace upon us. We should be those dripping sponges to which are blessing other people because we are running out. Okay, that is what we are called to be, and we are actually set up for that very thing. Yes, I get distracted. I know you get distracted. There are so many things that we could be thinking about, but our origin tends to be only little bits of our times. That's us choosing to recognize or believe in our Creator, have faith in our Creator, only a little bit of our time whenever all of our time was supposed to be surrounded around that. That's what we were created to do. Everything else can be secondary, but our Creator must come first. That's why John is writing this, to be able to centralize everything and say, I know you guys think so many different things about Jesus, but these are the things you need to know. He began. He said, excuse me, that's heresy. He said he began everything. Everything begins with him, but he himself has no beginning in and of himself. There is no other God for you to be able to believe in, and he's disclosed himself in such a personal way. You and I get to believe in him now. And so at the very, very end of this, verse 18, no one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side, but he has made him known. Even Moses didn't see as much as you and I get to see, in other words. Even Moses didn't get to see as much as the apostles got to see. And yet, you and I get to see. Okay. One of the stories I read this week is about a guy named Charles Steinmetz. Okay, I'm sure I didn't say that exactly right, but you guys probably aren't going to check me later. But he was actually the mechanical genius for the Ford Motor Company. And so he knew Henry Ford himself. They were friends. But Steinmetz was the guy who was the genius behind everything. They said he could actually create a motor inside of his mind, it break down inside of his mind, he'd be able to fix it inside of his mind, and so that whenever he actually went to go put it all together, it was something that was going to work with precision, and you could trust Steinmetz whenever it came to designing these things. There was one day on the assembly line where things just broke down and none of Ford's men could actually fix it, so they called Ford's friend Steinmetz to come in to be able to fix it. He worked on a couple of things for just a couple of minutes, walked back over, flipped the switch, and the assembly line was running. After a few days, Henry Ford received a bill from Steinmetz for $10,000, of which, to me, that's a lot of money right now. I'm sure there was a lot more money whenever the Ford Motor Company was just getting started, right? And so Henry Ford, he said he wrote a note instead of paying it, and he said, "Charlie, isn't $10,000 a little bit high for somebody doing a little bit of tinkering?" And so Steinmetz, he redid his bill, and he said, "Tinkering, $10. Knowing where to tinker, $9,990. Okay. Whenever it comes to us reading the book of John, this should be us saying, "Lord, you are my creator, and I know that you know where to tinker at. Would you tinker inside of me and fix me?" Because it does not matter how long you have followed Jesus. It does not matter if you're a beginner or you're about to go to heaven and be with him. We all need some tinkering, don't we? And this is us being able to say, "Lord, I see you as the true word, and I see you as one who knows how to fix me. So here's everything. Show me where I must be better. Show me where I must be able to surrender this part of my life or that part of my life so that I might follow you more all the time, because I do find myself lacking." Maybe you find yourself lacking as well. That isn't something for us to just beat ourselves up about, because there's a lot of grace upon grace for us to be able to have whenever we come to Christ for who he is rather than what we would maybe prefer him to be sometimes. You guys bow with me. Father,